Hi everyone, and welcome to day 2. I'm going to do a brief summary of the responses we got from you all about your homework assignment, and that was to identify what are some issues and challenges, and some good things too, that are happening in your communities about immigrants. So I think I'll start with the more positive things that people mentioned and then move to challenges and then move on into what we'll do in day 2. So some of the positive things that you all mentioned was that while it was difficult for immigrant students to pass state exams that were required for high school graduation and entrance into college, there has been an increasing trend towards portfolio assessment so that there is an alternative for students who may be still experiencing language difficulties. And another positive thing that was noted was that there is, in some places at least, some increased funding for English language learners. And that in many communities, particularly agricultural communities that are very dependent on immigrant labor, there is a real valuing of immigrants as assets to those communities, and vigorous protection against raids and trying to protect them in other ways so that they really are valued as important economic contributors to those communities. And I think, too, there is a general sense that economic contributions of immigrants as entrepreneurs, workers, and consumers is increasingly being noted. Somebody mentioned how they revitalize neighborhoods that have been in long-term economic decline. I know here at the Immigrant Learning Center, we have spent a lot of time documenting the contributions of immigrant entrepreneurs from neighborhood storefronts to businesses that are in a growth mode, like transportation and food distribution, all the way up to the technology and science arena, which are very important here in Massachusetts. So that valuing of immigrants as economic contributors has been a positive thing. And also, in some cases, there has been increasing numbers of bilingual, bicultural staff. And also people mentioned that they feel that schools in which there is much more visibility of immigrants as people and the commonalities of immigrant groups across the centuries has been another very positive trend. And in that, art and music and storytelling are great equalizers. And as one person said, I love the diversity in my community. And I would echo that I love the diversity in Massachusetts, particularly in the streets of Boston. You walk around, you'll hear different languages, you'll see different dress, and it is what makes us a very vibrant and economically viable state. Denzel keeps prompting me to smile, so I'm going to try to do that. Okay, so in the challenges realm, I mentioned before that state proficiency exams can also be a real challenge for limited English students, and particularly in community colleges, passing the qualifying exam so you don't wind up in developmental ed or academic ESOL. But I think more importantly, I think people felt that the limited expectations by some school staff and the lack of cultural competence among some school staff is a real issue for immigrants. As is the English-only movement, which is very strong in many states, and you see that manifested in people's resentment of multilingual announcements or signage, and that people feel express resentment about that. And I think as part of that is that there is a very limited appreciation for how long it takes to become really fluent in another language. I think most of you who are language teachers know that when you become truly conversant in English, it's usually a 5-year process, something that Americans tend not to appreciate because we tend to be monolingual here, and that includes myself. But language barriers create a huge problem for immigrants because with limited English, you have very limited access to higher education and to job training opportunities, and let alone dealing with deportation threats. Even if you are here legally, that atmosphere of fear and being able to be stopped and racial profiling casts a real black cloud, I think, over the experience of many immigrants, and I've heard that, and some of you have mentioned that. Along with going back to, I think, the school staff and I think other places, which could be healthcare settings, there's a lot of cultural assumptions that are made that are unrecognized. And so it makes it very difficult for people with limited English and from different cultures to understand and navigate our systems. The anti-immigrant sentiment in the media is also noted by many of you as being very difficult, as well as the selective reporting of crime and other negative incidents involving immigrants. And local anti-immigrant local and state ordinances are another increasing problem. Here in Massachusetts, we just had a state budget passed, and they put these amendments on them as riders to the budget, and they decrease access to Section 8 housing, to services, to driver's license, and often they are snuck into budget items, but they are a real issue. A couple of you mentioned that assumptions about that all Latinos are undocumented is a big problem, and especially that they don't pay their fair share of taxes, they overuse social services, and they generally are a drain on the economy. None of this is true, incidentally, but it's all part of the stereotyping and myths that they take our jobs and don't pay taxes. And then you also noted that sometimes when there's large influxes of immigrant groups in particular communities, that makes it very difficult in the community because there's sort of a fear factor and just adjustment of having new groups in your community that creates a lot of tension, particularly if those immigrant groups are geographically clustered within a community or a particular neighborhood. So those are the things that you all mentioned as issues. So now I'm going to direct you to some resources that I'm going to let you investigate for the next 20 minutes to a half hour before we start Lorna Rivera's section on the sociology of immigration. Many of you have asked for data and resources to address these challenges and to highlight the benefits that immigrants bring. So in your Day 2 document folders, you're going to find several documents. One is called Facilitating the Debate, the Benefits and Burdens of Immigration. And in that you'll find some sort of teaching, learning exercises that you could use to do this in your classroom. One is called Agree, Disagree, and the other one is True, False, and there's a series of sample statements. You can make up your own that just gets people to talk on a rational basis and to look at evidence as it relates to those things. So in that document, you will also find at the end, in addition to the resources that the Immigrant Learning Center has provided, that there are other really excellent sources such as the Migration Policy Institute, the Immigration Policy Center, the Pew Institute, etc., which has all these are groups that really have reliable information that you can trust. It doesn't come from a biased point of view. Now, the other thing that we did here at the Immigrant Learning Center, since the whole issue about taxes and jobs and crime is part of the myths and stereotypes for immigrants, we put together here all of the research that we found from credible institutions across the country that address those issues. So one of those documents that you're going to find in the document folder is Immigrants, Taxes, and the Use of Welfare, Immigrants, Jobs, and the Labor Force, and Immigrants and Crime, and then an additional one about, in a more positive vein, called Economic Contributions of Immigrant Entrepreneurs. So we're going to give you now 20 minutes to a half an hour before 11:40 for you to go look at those documents and print them out if you want. Think about how you might use them in your practice.